Hello. Okay, I'm gonna try to help you out with this. So hopefully this helps. I don't have my iPad, so I can't really write anything to kind of model this for you. So I'm gonna try to explain it the best that I can. So I sent you this, and this is kind of a summary of the different transformations that you can do. So you're either gonna have a reflection that's always gonna come from a negative. You're gonna have a stretch or a shrink that's going to be multiplying by some number. And then you can have translations, which is going to be adding or subtracting some number. So the main thing to remember is if you look at all of these ones that are categorized horizontal, every transformation that causes a horizontal effect is always going to happen inside the function. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Everything that is going to cause a vertical transformation is going to happen outside of the function, okay? So you're going to do it like after everything else that's already there. Horizontal, the other thing to remember, horizontal is always the weird one. So you kind of have to do some extra stuff with stretches, shrinks, and translations when it comes to the horizontal ones. Vertical are always perfect. They do exactly what you think they're going to do. But when it comes to stretches and shrinks, your stretch factor always has to be the reciprocal if it's horizontal. So let's say you want to do a horizontal stretch by 2. In the equation, you're going to see 1/2. Like if it was 2/3, you're going to see 3/2 in the equation. And then with translations, it's always going to be sort of the opposite sign of what your instinct is. So like if I saw x plus 2, I think positive should go to the right, but it's actually the opposite. So whatever it's plus, it's going to move to the left. Whenever it's minus, it's going to go to the right. Now again, for vertical, it's exactly the way you would expect. Plus is going to go up, minus is going to go down. It's just going to be the number itself. So if it's a vertical stretch by 2, you're going to see a 2. It's going to be exactly there. Okay, so here's a couple of, here's some parent functions. And you'll have to bear with my typing here. So here's what I mean by the inside or the outside of the function. For example, if we look at the square root, if I wanted to do a vertical stretch by 2, then I would multiply the square root on the outside by the square root. I would multiply by 2. So this would be my new function. You'd give it a new name like g of x or something like that. So that would be a vertical stretch. And I know it's a stretch because 2 is bigger than 1. If it was going to be a shrink, it would have to be something smaller than 1, like 1/2 or 3/4 or 0.6, something like that. If it was going to be a horizontal stretch or shrink, again, this is where we have to do the reciprocal. But horizontal, like I said, always happens on the inside of the function. So the two things that we would have to do is instead of using 2, we'd have to use 1/2. Whoops. And again, because it's horizontal, it's going to happen on the inside of the function. If I was going to do that here with something like an x cubed, again, if I wanted to do vertical, it would just be 2x cubed. If I wanted to do horizontal, I would see inside parentheses 1/2 x, and then the cubed would be on the outside. So you can see again what I mean, like the horizontal stuff is happening inside parentheses, inside the square root. In this case, for the third example here, if it was horizontal, it would be happening where the x is here. So I would get 1/2x. Well, it would have to be 1/2, I guess. So this is kind of a bad example. But, well, it's because it ends up being the same. Ignore that example. That's a bad example. But so anyways, that is the difference between horizontal and vertical. Under the square root, inside parentheses, inside the absolute value, you're always going to see that happen down there. Now, if it came to reflections, a vertical reflection, would happen on the outside of the square root. So it would look like that. Whoops. And by vertical reflection, I mean like over the x-axis. If you kind of think of your hand flipping up and down, that's why I'd classify that as vertical. A horizontal reflection, you would see the negative under the square root, like that. Same thing in this case here. We would see the negative in front of the x cubed versus in parentheses. Whoops. Negative x cubed. So that's kind of your clue, is that you're going to see parentheses around sort of your base whenever you're looking at the polynomials, is that that's going to be a horizontal something that's happening. If I want to move it to the right or to the left, okay? So a horizontal translation. Translations we add or subtract. Well, let's do vertical first since that's the order that I've been going in. So vertical, let's say I want to move it up 2. I would see my square root of x, and then the plus 2 would happen outside of the radical because everything vertical happens on the outside. If I wanted to move it, say, to the right, then my adding and subtracting would happen under the radical. And again, horizontal is the weird one that always happens opposite, so a minus 2 would move this to the right. And same thing here. You'd either see it inside the parentheses for horizontal or after the x cubed itself if it were vertical. Like I would see x cubed plus 2 versus x minus 2 cubed. Okay. On these ones, like this rational expression here, same thing. If I was going to do a vertical shift, oops, it would happen after the fraction. If I were going to do a horizontal shift, it would happen under the fraction. And so then you can start working on sort of compositions of functions, meaning doing more than one of these at a time. So let me look at one of the ones that they sent me. Okay, so if you start, let's look at 1a on your homework. If you start with f of x equals x squared, and we want to translate this 4 to the left, reflect over the x-axis, vertical stretch by 2. Okay. We just have to put all of these in the right place. So anything that's vertical is going to go on the outside of the x squared. Anything that's horizontal is going to go on the inside. Now, if you think about this, 4 to the left, that's going to be horizontal, and horizontal is opposite, so it would be x plus 4 inside. So the squared has to go outside the parentheses. That's horizontal. A reflection over the x-axis, again, think the x-axis is the horizontal one. So if you flip over the x-axis, that categorizes it as vertical. So I would need a negative out there to make the reflection. And since it's a vertical stretch, it stays the same, and the 2 is what would go out here. So our new function, let's call it g of x, in this case would be negative 2x plus 4 squared. Okay. Let's say, for example, that I had f of x equals, let's do the square root of x again. And let's say that I wanted a horizontal shrink by 1/3. Let's say that I want to go to the right 1 and up 2. See if you can kind of think about where those pieces are going to go. The horizontal shrink has to go under the square root. Right 1 is horizontal, so that goes under the square root. And up 2 is vertical, so that goes after the square root. And so, again, horizontal is your reciprocal, so our new function would be, we're going to have the square root of 3x, that's the reciprocal of 1/3. Right 1 would be -1, and then up 2 would be +2, and notice that comes after the radical. So then the other part of your homework is to identify the transformations. And so let's see, on number 2, you've got, let's look at B because that one has a lot of parts. So 2b, I'm trying to read this off my phone, says g of x is equal to -1/4 x minus 1 to the 3rd power plus 2. Okay, so we just got to kind of go down the line and identify where things are happening. So we have a handful of things going on here. We have this negative. Well, that highlighted the whole thing. That's not helpful. So we have this negative. That has its own job. A negative is always going to make a reflection. We have the 1/4. That's multiplying. That's going to be a stretch or a shrink. And then we have adding and subtracting. So that's going to be shifts, translations up and down. Both of these things are happening outside of the parentheses. So that means that they are vertical. So the first thing I notice is that I have a vertical shrink by 1/4 because it's less than 1. That's how I know it's a shrink. That negative tells me that it's going to be an x-axis reflection because that would flip it up and down. Inside the parentheses, that -1 tells me it's horizontal and it's always the opposite, so that would be right 1. And then outside the parentheses is the +2, so that would be up 2. So that gives you a little bit of a rundown. I hope that's enough. It kind of got you started on a couple of problems. Sorry, you can hear my dogs, I'm sure. Hopefully that's enough to kind of get you started. So good luck with your homework. You got 3 hours to go, I guess.